What is up everyone, it's Bound here and welcome back to another video. In case you didn't know, Regulation G has returned starting this month, which is January, and 2 weeks have already passed since the start of Regulation G, which is essentially the part 2 of Regulation G, because Regulation G has previously happened for 4 months already. I'd like to know your thoughts on it so far, and maybe some things you found really fun to use, because personally I think there are so many strong options and so many different angles to approach this format from as well. But anyway, in this video I'd like to discuss 10 Pokemon that perform better and also gain additional roles in Regulation G compared to recent regulations, such as Regulation H or Regulation F. Now there are 2 Paradox Pokemon on this list, so in that case I'll just compare them to their usability in Regulation F because they weren't allowed in Regulation H. And lastly, this list isn't ordered, it's just, my personal opinion of which Pokemon perform better. So with that being said, let's get right into the list. So the first Pokemon I want to talk about is Scizor. Now Scizor is really good in Regulation H. I'm not saying it's a bad Pokemon at all, but Scizor became better in Regulation G compared to Regulation H. And that's because in Regulation H, it was more difficult for Scizor to carry out its main roles compared to what it did in Regulations F, E, D, and G. And yeah, and that's mainly because of the Bullet Punch, right? So Bullet Punch is Scizor's main selling point, as well as U-Turn. So it's obviously U-Turn is still really good, it can be used in any meta, but Bullet Punch gains more value when it's used against things like Fluttermane and Chien-Pao. So when Fluttermane and Chien-Pao are not in the format, just like Regulation H was the case, Scizor is going to gain less value. So there's also Pokemon that like Archaludon and Skelders that were used more commonly, so it became really difficult for Scizor to perform a sweeping role. Now, because of that, the Swords Dance sets basically became obsolete, and a lot of the sets were choice banded or Assault Vest because it can still be used as an effective pivot, but the Swords Dance sets pretty much went away because there's a lot of unaware Pokemon such as Skelders, like I said, and also Dondozo as well. So Scizor became very limited in how it was able to be used effectively. And yeah, like I said, in Regulation G, and as well in Regulation G, Scizor is able to, like I said, use Bullet Punch more against top Pokemon in the meta game, such as Fluttermane and Chien-Pao. And it's also to be able to use its choice sets just as effectively, if not more effectively, because of its ability to force switches and use U-turns or get momentum on your side. So, for example, Pokemon such as Miraidon and Koraidon have Scizors on their team, as well as maybe some Caloic Shadows, because its Scizor is an effective cushion in this meta because it's able to switch into dangerous Pokemon such as Fluttermane and Chien-Pao and just keep on the pressure. So the next Pokemon I want to talk about is Grimmsnarl. Now I'm sure some of you guys saw this coming, and the main reason why I put Grimmsnarl on this list is because in Regulation G, its ability to support teams gets higher, and the main reason for that is in previous regulations, Goldango, Pokemon such as Goldango and Archaludon, and just a lot of stalling tactics were more viable. So yeah, especially in Regulation H with the use of unawares and like I said, Goldango and Skelders and Archaludon make it really difficult for Grimmsnarl to carry out its support role without getting the screen stalled or getting its Thunder Wave nullified or getting its Parting Shot nullified. So Grimmsnarl, it definitely dropped off a lot. Like in Regulation H, it was like around 40th or 50th in usage consistently. But now in Regulation G, it's like almost in the top 10. It's like top 15 right now. So, and yeah, the main sets being used in Regulation G are these Light Clay screen sets or the Trick Lagging Tail sets too, which are basically paired with like Banded Koraidon or like Specs Miraidon or something like that, so that so those Pokemon can basically outspeed the opponent's faster Pokemon. So, and yeah, the screen sets can be paired with a lot of different setup sweepers, especially those restricted legendaries. So Grimmsnarl is able to support a lot better because it's a lot harder to nullify its stuff, and now that Goldango and Archaludon and the unaware Pokemon are used less, especially Goldango. Goldango basically fell off in usage, and the only times you pretty much see that the Goldangos is with the stall breaking sets, so it's only picked against like really stally teams like Ho-Oh or Eternatus teams. So the ability for Grimmsnarl to do work is just higher, so that's why it's used more in Regulation G, and that's why it's pretty much better overall. So the next Pokemon I want to talk about is Glamour. Now, Glamour definitely improves a lot in Regulation G compared to previous regulations. Now, in Regulation H, that was probably its worst regulation, just because the top of the meta, so Dragonite, Archuludon, and Gholdengo weren't affected by toxic spikes. So it became a lot harder for Glamour to gain value in that aspect. But in Regulation G, pretty much every top Pokemon, aside from like Landorus, and Dragonite, are able to be affected by toxic spikes, and there's a huge lack of steel types in the top meta as well. And most of the restricted legendaries are able to be poisoned. So Glamour just gains a lot of value in that aspect, and also especially the red card physically defensive set that I have right here is able to basically pressure Chien-Pao and be able to switch into Chien-Pao, force it out and put toxic spikes up, and it's able to force a lot of disruption on the opponent, and it makes it easier for your sweeper to basically perform its role better. Now that's mainly the role that it really like just really succeeds at in this regulation. But there's also sets such as Focus Sash or even like Assault Vest sets that are used a lot, as well as Power Herb sets. So Glamour is still able to carry on the pressure, but it's also able to basically attack while maybe scattering toxic spikes, which is it's a really unique role to have, and that's why in Regulation G it's used more, and it's able to basically be thrown onto a lot of a wide variety of teams. Now, some of you guys might be surprised to see Gliscor on this list, but I really think Gliscor is stronger in Regulation G than Regulation H in previous regulations. Now, yeah, like I know that Urshifu is very common in the meta right now, especially the Water Urshifu, which can basically punish Gliscor for using Sub or using Protect. So, but the reason why I think Gliscor is better is because of the surrounding Pokemon that can support it. So when you're, for example, like when a Gliscor is paired with Eternatus can basically support it and basically punish Pokemon that are supposed to counter Gliscor, such as Urshifu or Water Ogerpon and stuff like that. So it's a lot easier for Gliscor to be protected by its teammates, and that's why I think Gliscor is a better Pokemon. Now, that's pretty much it. Like, it's able to basically, it pairs really well with Toxic Spikes. So like I said, with the Eternatus and Gliscor, it's able to just carry out some Protect more easily. Because it basically enables defensive win conditions more easier in the format. So that's pretty much where Gliscor excels, and that's why I think it is better in Regulation G. And also, yeah, it's definitely used more from what I've seen. Definitely used more in Regulation H or Regulation G than Regulation H. So that's pretty much my two reasons why they're right there. Now, the next Pokemon I want to talk about is Rillaboom. Now, again, some of you guys are probably not surprised to see Rillaboom on the list, and yeah, the reason why Rillaboom is better in Regulation G is because of the ability to basically be a cushion on certain teams. So basically, there's a lot of Assault Vest Rillabooms, and Rillaboom is able to deal with Pokemon such as Miraidon and Calyrex, as well as changing the terrain. So Miraidon, it's really good against Miraidon because it changes the terrain. And yeah, it's just really able to gain control, and it's really strong against a Kyogre as well. So it can not only be strong against those Pokemon, but the grassy terrain enables the legendary Pokemon as well. So you see Rillaboom a lot of the time with like Terrapagos, because the grassy terrain makes it really easy for Terrapagos to gain a lot of HP as combined with the leftovers that it usually has. Or you could see it with like a Necrozma, Duskmane, or you could see it with an Eternatus, especially Eternatus, because the grassy terrain will weaken Earthquake, so it makes it easier for the Eternatus to wall out the opponent. So and it gains more HP, so Rillaboom plus Eternatus can be really annoying to deal with. But yeah, that's pretty much why I think Rillaboom is stronger in Regulation G. And in Regulation H, it was still used, but it wasn't able to be used in a variety of teams. It was only used in like specific things like Rillaboom plus Grassy Sea Gholdengo or something like that. And the reason why is because Archuludon and Dragonite were really common right now, or common in the meta. So it basically made it very difficult for Rillaboom to function. And especially Archuludon, because Rillaboom doesn't have the power to be able to get through it. Even like a strong high horsepower isn't able to get through Archuludon, and Archuludon's Draco Meteor and just high special attacking moves are just able to push through Rillaboom, and it just makes it difficult for Rillaboom to function, because in Regulation G, Archuleta was the defining factor of the meta. Like, everything had to be built with it in mind. And there's also things like Volcarona, but sometimes they run Rock Terra to deal with that, but it just pressured to run specific things in the meta, so that's why I felt it was very limited in the metagame. And in Regulation F and previous regulations, I was actually using Rillaboom a lot. Like in Regulation E, I got a really good placement with like Swords Dance, Grassy Seed, Rillaboom. And yeah, it was really strong in those formats, but I think in Regulation G, it just gained a lot more versatility, and the Grassy Seed sets are still effective. Like I still see those used at the highest level, so I think Rillaboom just gets a lot better in this regulation. The next Pokemon I want to talk about is Walking Wake. Now, Walking Wake was only allowed in Regulation F and G, but in Regulation G, it actually gains a really unique role that it wasn't able to fulfill before, and that is answering Koraidon teams. And it's also enabled by Koraidon as well because of the photosynthesis ability, giving it a stat boost to its highest stat, and just increasing its power overall. And with the signature move Hydro Steam, it's able to it provides a unique offensive capability that Sun teams never really had. So a lot of the Sun teams that before Regulation G were just like Flutter Mane or Roaring Moon or something like that. So having a water offensive Pokemon in the Sun is really unique. And yeah, being able to throw out 120 base power water moves in the Sun is really unique, like I said, because Flutter Mane and a lot of Sun teams had a problem against like opposing fire types, so being able to punish that is a huge advantage right there, and it's unique, so that's cool. And you could also use it against the opponent's Sun team as well, like against opposing Koraidons, because a lot of the Koraidons will go Terra Fire. Most of the Koraidons in the meta right now are Terra Fire, so if you're able to basically gain a speed boost from photosynthesis and outspeed it and just one KO it with Hydro Steam and Terras, and even if Koraidon doesn't Terra, you still have strong moves like Dragon Pulse and Draco Meteor to still pressure it very hard. So it's actually a pretty cool Pokemon that gains a unique role in Regulation G, which is why it actually gets a fair amount of usage, and you see it at the top level very often actually. So it's pretty interesting. Now, I'm sure you guys have seen this coming, but Ditto obviously gets stronger in Regulation G compared to other regulations, and that's because of just the nature of the restricted legendary format. Now, the main thing is that sweepers like Zacian and Caloric Shadow can become very overbearing, so Ditto is basically used to copy their stat boosts and punish them, because it's more consistently able to work out in this format compared to other formats, because sweeping it's valued more in this format compared to other formats, so Ditto is basically able to gain value automatically. And this is generally why you see a lot of Ditto in general in legendary formats, because it's able to just automatically outspeed the opponent's legendary sweeper with the Choice Scarf, because you're just going to be faster automatically. I mean, there's pretty much no other explanation to it, really. Now, another Pokemon that I believe gets stronger in Regulation G is Garganacl, the Salt Pyramid. So I really think Garganacl gains a unique role that pretty much no other Pokemon can fulfill, and that's being able to obviously be a wall while ignoring status conditions. So the main thing that Garganacl gains in this format is the ability to wall out legendaries that try to perform support roles. So the biggest example you see is like the Grass Terra Garganacl to wall out like Leech Seed, Caloric Shadow, and it also just resists Astral Barrage thanks to the Purifying Salt ability. So, Grass Terra is actually the most common Terra on this thing. And just for the reason like I said right there, and also it's good against Kyogre and it's good against Miraidon's electric moves. So that's pretty much the main role you see. But however, the Ghost Terra sets that you've seen in every other regulation are still very strong in Regulation G, because they're really strong against the opponent's bulky teams, like for example Ho-Oh stall teams that try to use maybe like a Gliscor or something to stall you out. But if you go Ghost Terra and use Curse, that's not going to be able to happen. So the Ghost Terra sets they're still really strong, and even other Terras are used situationally to wall out certain Pokemon, like for example Fire Terra to wall out a Koraidon Flutter combination, which is very common, or the Water Terra to just be a solid annoying defensive Pokemon, and other things like that. So This Pokemon, it just gains a very huge role, especially compared to Regulation H, where the top Pokemon in the metagame threaten it very hard, and it's pretty much forced to use Terra in almost every situation, because the top Pokemon were Dragonite, which can threaten it with Encore and just potentially be a Covert Cloak set and just ruin it today. You have Archaludon, which threatens it with strong steel moves and electro shots, because a lot of the times this thing would go flying or water. And then you have Goldenga, which can be Covert Cloak and or just use Trick. And then you have Ursaluna Blood Moon, which threatens its Terra, and if not, it's going to get Water KO'd. So for that reason, Garganacl wasn't able to be used as effectively in Regulation H, as well as previous regulations compared to Regulation G. So that's pretty much the reasoning right there. I'm back on the picnic because I don't have a Gothitelle in my boxes. I guess I don't have one anymore, but Gothitelle is the next Pokemon on my list, and the main reason why Gothitelle becomes stronger in Regulation G is because its ability to support physical legendaries. So very commonly, I'm sure a lot of guys know that Pokemon such as Zacian and Koraidon struggle very much against Pokemon like Dondozo, right? And this is just one example, but Gothitelle is able to basically threaten tanks that can wall out legendary Pokemon. So in previous regulations, Gothitelle struggled very much because of the prevalence of Pokemon like Goldengo and Fluttermane, and just a lot of ghost types in general. So when you're able to get Gothitelle in the right situation in this regulation, like against a tank, which again is a very common situation, you can just log out the game immediately. So once you remove the Dondozo from like the opponent's team, your Zacian or your Koraidon are able to be way better. So that's basically a role that it wasn't able to fulfill because it just struggled to get in and actually do anything in previous regulations. And the last Pokemon on the list is Iron Treads. Now, Iron Treads was to be honest, it was a very niche Pokemon in previous regulations, but in Regulation G, it was actually able to gain a good amount of roles. And the main roles it was able to basically fulfill were having that ground and steel typing to deal with Baridon, or being able to be used strongly against Pokemon like Calyrex Shadow with the booster energy plus speed, or just being able to spread Stealth Rock more reliably because of the high speed, and also with the use of Endeavor and Substitute and things like that. So Iron Treads basically was able to threaten a lot of the top legendary Pokemon in the meta, but it's also really strong against Pal and Fluttermane, which are the two most common Pokemon outside of the legendaries. When you have a combination like that, Iron Treads becomes very reliable, and it's hard for it to go to waste without doing anything to the opponent, especially with the fact that it gets knockoff too. So it's able to threaten Terra and switches while using knockoff or Stealth Rock or something like that. And yeah, it's just a really strong Pokemon. And you even see sets like Choice Band or Assault Vest to completely catch the opponent off guard and destroy them unexpectedly. So yeah, I think Iron Treads is a really cool Pokemon, and it's a very interesting Pokemon, and I'm glad it's able to gain more play in Regulation G. So that's pretty much my list of 10 Pokemon that can perform better in Regulation G compared to previous regulations such as Regulation H or Regulation F. Yeah, hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.